The bartender had a warm smile and an easy way with people. Locals knew him as Dania, familiar face behind the counter at a small tucked-away pub along a quiet mountain road. It wasn't a place most people stumbled upon. You either lived nearby or you were lost. But Danny? He made the place feel less isolated, always ready with a story, a drink, and that old gold cross around his neck. The one that glinted under the bar lights when he leaned in to listen to a customer's troubles. That's just the kind of guy he was. Friendly, steady. The kind of person you'd never expect to just vanish, but one night he did. It was a cold October evening, right after the last customer had left. The wind howled through the trees, and the only light came from the soft glow behind the bar. Danny had been seen cleaning glasses, humming an old tune. Nothing out of the ordinary, but by morning he was gone. No note, no signs of a struggle, and nothing missing except him. His car was still parked out back, his coat still hanging behind the bar. The lights were left on, and 2 empty glasses were found on the counter, even though no one remembered seeing anyone else come in late. Locals were shaken. Police searched the woods, combed through guest lists, questioned anyone who might have had reason to be there that night. But they found nothing. Not a trace, no witnesses. No camera footage, just silence. And as the weeks turned into months, the mystery faded into whispers. People moved on, but that pub never felt quite the same. Eventually, it shut down. Years passed. 6 of them, to be exact, and then something strange happened. A cleaning crew was sent to clear out a run-down motel, just a few miles from where the pub once stood. The place had been closed for a while, left in disrepair after a fire. Had damaged part of the roof. The room smelled like dust and mildew, and most of the furniture was too old or broken to salvage. But as one of the workers pulled back the carpet in room 6, they froze. Beneath the floor covering was a large, dark mark burned into the wooden boards, a perfect circle with a 5-pointed star drawn through it. A pentagram. It looked old, like it had been there for years, hidden under layers of dust and time. The worker who found it said the air suddenly felt heavier, like the room itself didn't want them there. A sense of unease filled the space, and nobody stayed long enough to argue about what it meant. But before they left, one of them noticed something odd in the closet's small, rusted box hidden in the corner. Inside it, wrapped in a piece of cloth, was a necklace. A cross. The exact one Danny used to wear. That discovery reopened everything. Suddenly, people who had nearly forgotten the case started talking again. How could something of his end up in an abandoned motel room? Especially a room no one had used in years. Some speculated it was a prank, someone messing with local folklore. Others weren't so sure. The cross wasn't just similar, it was identical, down to a tiny chip on one edge that his friends remembered well. As news spread, more unsettling details began to surface. Records showed that room 6 had only been rented a few times before the fire. One guest had left early, complaining of nightmares and odd noises at night. Another never came back for their belongings. And then there was the night manager, who reportedly quit without notice after refusing to enter that room alone. There was no proof of foul play. No clear connection between the pub and the motel, least not yet. But something about the timing and that symbol burned into the floor was impossible to ignore. Some began to wonder if Danny had stumbled into something far darker than anyone realized that night. Something that didn't want to be found. What happened in room 6? Was Danny ever there? Or had someone tried to use that room to cover up something deeper, something that had been waiting all this time to be discovered? And perhaps the most chilling question of all, if Danny didn't leave on his own, who or what took him? The answers, if they exist, are still buried beneath layers of silence and shadow. But one thing is certain, this story is far from over, because what they found in that room wasn't just a clue, it was a message. Danny wasn't just some guy behind the bar. He was part of the fabric of that small mountain town, he remembered. Your drink order, asked about your kids, and never let anyone leave without at least one laugh. He grew up just 20 minutes away, went to the local school, and took over the pub after the previous owner, his uncle, passed away. Most nights, the regulars would stay until closing just to sit and talk with him. And for all his easygoing charm, there was always something a little old-fashioned about Danny. He never owned a smartphone, still played records instead of streaming music, and always wore that cross around his neck like it meant something more than style. The old pub where Danny worked was called the Lantern. It sat at the end of a winding road. No one drove unless they had to. It wasn't flashy, just a cozy wooden place with fogged windows and a warm fireplace in winter. Some said the building itself was over 80 years old. Stories had been passed down for generations, rumors about things heard in the woods at night, about a man who once disappeared from the same pub back in the 60s. But like most small-town legends, people brushed it off. Just talk. Until Danny vanished. Back then, the town did everything it could to find him. Flyers went up. A volunteer search party walked through the forest. Drones were even used to scan the thick trees behind the pub, but nothing. And because there was no real sign of foul play, authorities didn't push too hard. After a few months, the case went cold. Danny's family was devastated, but even they began to accept that maybe he had just walked away from it all. People do that sometimes, don't they? But the truth is, no one really believed that. Danny wasn't the type to leave without a word. And now, 6 years later, finding that cross in room 6 was like someone reaching out from the past and shaking the town awake. The motel where the symbol was found, it's called Hollow Pines Inn, had always been a bit off. Built back in the 70s. It was originally a rest stop for travelers passing through the forest route, but over time it got a strange reputation. People talked about lights flickering at night, doors unlocking by themselves, and that uneasy feeling of being watched, especially in certain rooms. Room 6 was one of them. Staff rarely used it unless the place was full, and even then, they'd do a quick cleanup and get out. There's one story from a former night clerk named Bill who worked there in 2017, the same year Danny vanished. He never mentioned it publicly before, but once news of the pentagram and cross came out, he finally spoke up. He said one night, just after midnight, the phone at the front desk rang from room 6. That wasn't unusual. Guests sometimes called for towels or asked about the Wi-Fi. But when Bill answered, he swears no one spoke. All he could hear was a low whisper, like someone breathing too close to the receiver. He hung up, waited a minute, and called the room back. No answer. He walked down the hall to check, but when he got there, the room was dark and locked from the inside. The next morning, it showed as unoccupied in the system. People shrugged it off as a glitch. Maybe someone else had stayed there and the records got mixed up. Maybe Bill imagined it. But now, paired with everything else, it doesn't seem so simple. What no one understands is how Danny's necklace ended up there. He never stayed at that motel, at least, not officially. There's no booking history, no record of him ever visiting, and no known connection to the owners. Yet the cross is unmistakably his. It's been confirmed by his sister, Maria, who remembers giving it to him on his birthday when they were teenagers. She said he never took it off, not once. That's what's making this whole situation even stranger. People have begun digging again. Not just the local police, but amateur sleuths, online mystery forums, even a few paranormal investigators. They've gone over old maps, cross-checked timelines, and started tracing back anyone who might have stayed in room 6 during the year Danny vanished. One of the guests who stayed in that room had rented it under a fake name. The ID checked out at the time, but a deeper look shows it was a forgery. That person hasn't been identified since another visitor checked in and left in less than 2 hours, saying they heard knocking on the walls and whispering behind the mirror. Every time someone thinks they're close to making sense of it, something else pushes it further out of reach. Maria, Danny's sister, has been doing her own digging. She recently found something odd among Danny's old things, tucked in a drawer of his apartment, which had remained mostly untouched since he disappeared, was a notebook with pages filled with names and dates. At first, it looked like a guest list for the pub, but as she went deeper, she noticed strange symbols scribbled in the margins: circles, triangles, stars. Some pages were torn out. Others were stuck together with what looked like dried wax. She doesn't remember Danny being interested in anything occult or unusual, but something clearly had him writing all this down. She's planning to hand the notebook over to investigators, but part of her is afraid of what it might reveal. The town itself has started to feel heavier lately. Locals say animals have been acting strange: dogs barking at nothing, birds gathering in weird patterns, the woods too quiet at night. The site of the old pub is still boarded up, but people have reported seeing lights flickering inside. Of course, it could be kids messing around. But after all this time, and with new attention on the case, more people are wondering if whatever happened to Danny wasn't just about one man going missing. Maybe it was about something much older, something buried. The cross was a clue. The pentagram was a warning. And the story that's now starting to unfold might not just be about solving a mystery. It might be about stopping something before it finds someone else. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Ever since she found the notebook in Danny's drawer, her sleep had been broken by dreams that didn't feel like dreams. In one, she stood alone. In that old pub, the fireplace cold, the bar empty, and the door behind her slowly creaking open. She never turned around in those dreams. Something in her gut told her not to. Each time she woke, her room felt too quiet, like the air had been holding its breath. She wasn't the only one feeling it. Across town, Mark, one of the original search volunteers from when Danny disappeared, had been going through his own memories from that week 6 years ago. Back then, he had helped search the woods behind the lantern. He remembered something odd that he'd dismissed at the time: deep grooves in the dirt, arranged in a circular pattern, almost like they had been carved or burned into the ground. The search team assumed they were old tire tracks or erosion. But now, after hearing about the pentagram found under the motel carpet, Mark wondered if they had overlooked something important. He went back to the same spot. The grooves were gone, covered by leaves and time, but something still felt wrong. The trees were quiet again, too quiet. Meanwhile, rumors were beginning to swirl online. A small subreddit dedicated to unsolved mysteries had picked up the story and was trying to connect it to other strange disappearances in remote areas. A user from another state claimed they had stayed at a similar motel back in 2018 and found odd symbols under the bed frame, symbols that matched what Maria had seen in Danny's notebook. Another mentioned a bartender named Dean who looked just like Danny but with a different name, seen briefly working at a roadside bar in New Mexico before vanishing again weeks later. Was it a case of mistaken identity or something stranger? The motel manager at Hollow Pines, Mr. Carver, was beginning to regret ever allowing the cleaning crew to speak publicly. Reporters were now circling the area, asking about the burned mark in room 6 and demanding to see the room. Carver avoided them as best he could, but one evening, he sat down and spoke quietly with an old guest who had returned after seeing the story on the news. The man said he remembered room 6 clearly. He had checked in for one night during a rainstorm and woke up in the middle of the night to find all his belongings moved to the other side of the room. He thought maybe the staff had come in for cleaning and forgot to mention it. But the door had been locked from the inside, and the chain was still latched. He never reported it, just left and never came back until now. Back in town, Maria met with a retired librarian who used to know her brother well. The woman had gone through local archives and found something buried in an old newspaper article from the 1960s. Another bartender, this one named Eli, had disappeared from the lantern under similar circumstances. Same time of year, same sudden. Vanishing, no suspects, no trail. The article was short, brushed off as a likely runaway. But the eerie part was a comment made by a local at the time. They claimed Eli had been researching the old stories and had been spending nights in the woods behind the pub, listening to what was buried beneath the roots. That phrase stuck with Maria, especially since Danny's notebook mentioned something similar, voices from the roots, not above, but below. Even as the tension built, nobody could agree on what exactly was going on. Was this the work of a disturbed person trying to send a message? Was it linked to something ritualistic? Or were people, in their fear, connecting dots that didn't really connect? One local investigator, Lila, had been tracking unexplained symbols across abandoned buildings in the region. She noted that the pentagram found under the carpet wasn't just random. It was part of a much older design, a seal, often used in folklore to trap or summon something, depending on how it was drawn. The edges of the symbol in room 6 were smudged, like it had been partially erased or interrupted. If it was meant to contain something, had it been released? Lila wasn't the type to jump to supernatural conclusions. But even she couldn't deny how many similar markings had been found recently in unrelated places. Farmhouses, sheds, basements of old inns. Most were tied to places where people had vanished. It didn't prove anything, but it unsettled her. And unsettling was becoming the new normal for everyone involved. One evening, Maria returned home to find her front door slightly open. She lived alone, and she was sure she had locked it. Nothing was stolen, nothing moved. But the notebook, Donnie's notebook, was sitting on the kitchen table, open to a page she hadn't seen before. A simple drawing, the layout of a room. In the center, a circle with 5 lines, the same symbol as the motel floor. In the top corner of the page, one word was written in messy handwriting: stay. That night, she didn't sleep. She tried calling the detective who had originally handled Danny's case, but he had retired last year and left no forwarding contact. She even reached out to the local priest, not for answers, but just to talk. He had heard whispers, too, about places where things felt off, where shadows didn't move right, where animals refused to enter. Places not far from the lantern and the motel. Still, no one had any real answers. The deeper everyone dug, the more tangled it became. New names, surface people who had known Danny in his final weeks. A woman he was reportedly meeting in secret. A man who visited the pub just days before he vanished and never showed up again. Another bartender in a neighboring town who had recently gone missing. His last shift eerily similar to Danny's. The pattern was growing, but no one knew what it pointed to. And somewhere in all of this, the cross, the symbols, the dreams, the silence was the truth about what really happened to Danny. But the more they searched, the more it felt like something didn't want to be found. Maria knew she couldn't ignore it anymore. The signs were growing louder, more direct. The drawing in the notebook, the unlocked door, the cross showing up miles away from where Danny vanished. It wasn't just coincidence. Something was pushing her toward something, and every time she tried to back away, something else would drag her closer. She started spending more time at the old pub, even though it had been closed for years. The building was crumbling now, windows boarded, weeds curling up the wooden porch. But the back door still opened with the key she kept from when Danny used to let her lock up. Inside, dust blanketed everything like snow. The smell of mold and wood rot hung thick in the air. And yet, it felt like Danny was still in there, like the place hadn't forgotten him. One night, she brought Lila with her. They didn't tell anyone where they were going. Lila had gone through more of the notebook and found something: a small hand-drawn map. Not of a town or road, but the layout of the woods behind the lantern. A path twisted through it, with strange markings along the trail. Circles, arrows, and tiny notes written in the margins. One symbol appeared again and again, a circle with a break at the top. Maria didn't know what it meant, but Lila thought it was something old. Maybe a symbol for a gate or an opening. They followed the map into the woods, flashlights cutting through the dense dark. The air was colder than usual, the silence heavier. No bugs, no wind, just the sound of their boots over fallen leaves. After 20 minutes, the trail narrowed and curved behind a cluster of mossy stones. And there it was, just like in the notebook. A clearing, perfectly round, sunken slightly into the ground. Trees formed a circle around it, tall and still, like they were watching. In the center was a pile of stones, arranged in a way that looked too intentional to be random. Lila knelt and brushed away some dirt. Beneath it, something metal glinted. A ring, rusted but still solid, attached to a wooden hatch half buried in the ground. Maria hesitated. Everything in her body screamed not to touch it. But they opened it. The hatch led to a narrow stairway, more like a tunnel carved into the earth. It smelled like damp soil and ash. The walls were rough, roots poking through in places. They took careful steps down, their flashlights flickering. Lila whispered that the ground was warmer than it should be, like heat was rising from below. After what felt like forever, they reached the bottom. The chamber was small. Stone walls, no furniture, just carvings. Dozens of them, the same symbols. From the notebook, etched into every surface. On the far wall, a larger design had been painted, though the paint had faded. A massive pentagram. But this one had more detailed lines and strange shapes woven into the corners. And then they saw it. Pinned to the wall by 2 rusted nails was a photograph. It was old, slightly curled at the edges, but clear enough to recognize Danny standing behind the bar. He was smiling, but something was off. Behind him, barely visible in the dark shelves of bottles, was a face. Not his, not a customer's. A pale face with hollow eyes, staring straight at the camera. Maria stepped back, heart pounding. Lila took the photo down and flipped it over. A date was written on the back. October 14th, the night Danny disappeared. They didn't speak on the way back. The woods felt different now, almost tighter, as if the trees had shifted while they were underground. When they finally stepped out into the clearing behind the lantern, both women felt it at the same time. They weren't alone. Movement. Just at the edge of the tree line. A figure, standing still. Too far to see clearly. Not approaching. Just watching. Maria raised her flashlight, and in the beam of light, the figure turned and stepped back into the dark. Silent. Vanishing like it had never been there. That night, Maria received a message from an unknown number. No name, no contact photo. Just a single sentence. You were not supposed to find it. The message disappeared seconds later, leaving no trace. That same evening, a fire alarm went off at the Hollow Pines Motel. Room 6, untouched since the discovery, was found with the door wide open. Inside, the furniture had been pushed to the walls. In the center, the carpet had been pulled back again. The symbol, which had begun to fade with age, was now darker than ever, fresh, like it had been redrawn. But no one had gone in. Security footage from the hallway showed static for a full hour. Nothing recorded. The following day, the motel manager quit and left town. Lila went missing 2 days later. Maria was the last one who had seen her. They had met for coffee. Lila had been nervous, saying she thought they'd uncovered something much bigger than just Danny's disappearance. She believed there had been others before him, people tied to the land, the pub, even the woods. She had compiled a file, photos, maps, handwritten notes. All of it was gone now. Her apartment had been cleared out. No sign of forced entry. No calls. No messages. The only thing left was a slip of paper Maria found tucked under her windshield wiper the next morning, for words, "They always come back." Now Maria was alone again, and whatever this was, whatever took Danny, whatever left that cross, whatever was hiding in the spaces between old buildings and older trees, it was getting closer. And this time, it wasn't hiding anymore. The days after Lila's disappearance passed in a blur. Maria didn't leave her house except to buy groceries or gas. And even then, she kept her head down, heart thudding every time someone walked too close. She couldn't stop thinking about the note, "They always come back." It echoed in her mind, taunting her, daring her to keep going. But she didn't know what she was even chasing anymore. Danny. The truth? Or something far worse she hadn't fully understood yet. One cold morning, Maria's phone rang. Unknown number. For a moment, she almost didn't answer. But something told her to. When she picked up, no one spoke at first. Then a soft, familiar voice came through, one that sent a chill straight through her chest. "Maria, it's me." It was Danny. Or it sounded like him. Same tone. Same way he used to say her name when they were kids. But the call lasted only seconds. No explanation, no reply when she begged him not to hang up. Just that one sentence, then silence. The call ended and the number vanished from her history. Not even in the recent log, she stared at the phone, numb. If it was really him, why wouldn't he say more? Where had he been? And if it wasn't, who was playing with her like this? Later that day, a stranger knocked on her door. He introduced himself as Eli Bernan, investigator from a private group looking into unusual cold cases. He wasn't with the police, but he claimed to have followed cases like Danny's for years. Disappearances near isolated buildings, unexplained symbols. Recurring patterns of missing people always in areas where old structures stood long after they should have been torn down. Hollow Pines, The Lantern, and several others like them across the country. He showed Maria photos. One was of a cabin in Colorado, burned to its foundation, with the same broken circle symbol scorched into the ground nearby. Another showed an underground chamber almost identical to the one Maria had found, same carvings. Same pattern of symbols, same sealed hatch, now ripped open. According to Eli, that location was the last place a woman named Annie was seen. She too had been investigating a missing family member. She too had vanished. Maria didn't know if she could trust him, but there was something steady in Eli's eyes. He wasn't scared the way most people were when they heard this stuff. He looked tired. Yes, worn down, but not afraid. He told her he believed Danny had uncovered something ancient. Something people have tried to keep hidden for decades, maybe longer. A network of sites tied by symbols and rituals most forgot or never understood in the first place. A pattern repeating itself. But the real twist came when Eli pulled out a photo he had never shown publicly before. It was grainy, taken from a security camera outside an old diner in Nevada. The man in the picture was walking past the window, head down, wearing a faded flannel shirt and boots. Around his neck, barely visible, was a gold cross with a chipped edge, Danny, and the time stamp. 2 weeks ago, Maria's breath caught. If it was real, he was alive. Somewhere. But then what had they found in the underground room? Why was his necklace left in the motel? Why were people disappearing? Eli explained that in almost every case like this, there were signs of movement long after the person was presumed dead. Sightings, phone calls, objects left behind, items that should have been lost or destroyed, somehow showing up in different places. He didn't believe Danny was completely missing in the usual sense. He suspected that whatever force had taken these people hadn't taken them completely. Not all at once. Some were returned. Changed as he said this, Maria remembered the photo from the wall in the underground room. Danny behind the bar, smiling with that pale face in the background. It wasn't a trick of light. It wasn't just a shadow. Someone nor something had been there with him, and maybe it still was. Maria asked Eli what the symbols meant, especially the pentagrams and broken circles. He hesitated before answering. According to his research, the symbols were part of an old binding system, used not to summon something, but to keep it in, to mark places where the barrier between this world and something else, something older, darker, was thin. The more symbols appeared, the weaker the barrier became. The more attention it received, the faster it spread. And Danny may have been the first to break it without realizing. That night, Maria tried to rest, but sleep didn't come easy. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the hallway light outside her bedroom flickered on. She got up slowly, gripping her phone. The hallway was empty. But on the floor, just beneath the light, was a new page torn from Danny's notebook. Not left there earlier, not by her. It showed a symbol she hadn't seen before. A square with jagged edges intersected by a spiral. At the bottom, 3 words written in his handwriting. It knows now. She backed away, heart thudding. That's when her phone buzzed. A new notification from a cloud account she hadn't opened in years. The account Danny used to use to store old photos of the pub. Somehow, someone had just uploaded a new file. It was a video, only 10 seconds long. It showed a dark hallway, grainy and out of focus, lit by a single bulb swinging overhead. A figure stood at the far end, unmoving, barely visible in the flickering light. Then a voice, whispering her name, and then nothing. Maria stared at the screen, frozen. She wasn't sure what scared her more, the fact that someone was still watching her, or the growing certainty that Danny, wherever he was, wasn't just lost. He was trapped, and something was keeping him there. Maria didn't wait this time. By sunrise, she was already driving. She didn't tell anyone where she was going, not even Eli. She had studied the photos, the maps, the notebook scraps, every pattern Danny had left behind, and she realized something no one else had noticed. Every place tied to a disappearance, every symbol, every strange event, they all formed a wide, irregular circle, a boundary, and in the center of that boundary, deep in the forest where no roads reached, was an old chapel, long forgotten. It had shown up once in a photo from Danny's notebook. The roof collapsed and trees growing through its stone walls. That was the place he had been circling. That was where she would find answers. It took hours by foot. Her phone lost signal halfway there. The deeper she went, the more the trees leaned inward, and the sunlight thinned like smoke in the air. But she kept moving, clutching Danny's notebook like a compass. Then, as she pushed through a thick wall of undergrowth, she saw it. The chapel? It sat crooked in the soil, leaning slightly like it was sinking. Vines ran up its crumbling walls, and moss covered the steps. The front doors were open, as if waiting. Inside, dust hung in the air like breath. The pews were broken and scattered. And at the front of the chapel stood an altar with something laid on top. A mirror, small, old. Framed in black wood, the glass darkened by age. But when Maria stepped closer, her reflection didn't move. She blinked, but the woman in the mirror didn't. Instead, the face slowly shifted features, changing into someone else. Danny. His image stared back at her, eyes wide, mouth open like he wanted to speak, but couldn't. Behind him in the mirror, shapes flickered. Shadows that pulsed, circling him, holding him there. Trapped in that thin barrier between two places. She reached out and touched the glass. The moment her fingers met the surface, a jolt ran through her body. The chapel groaned, and a low sound echoed from deep beneath the floor, like something waking up. The symbols from the notebook began to glow faintly along the stone walls, pulsing like a heartbeat. One by one, the cracks in the mirror widened. Then a voice spoke from behind her. "You brought the last piece." Maria turned slowly. Eli stood in the doorway, but something was wrong. His eyes were darker, sunken. His face too pale. The voice wasn't entirely his. It was deeper, layered, like something else was speaking through him. She stepped back. "What are you talking about?" Eli's lips twitched. It couldn't break through without a tie from inside and out. "Your brother opened the gate. You just unlocked it." Realization hit her like a wave. The notebook, the symbols, the cross, none of it was about finding Danny. It was about bringing someone close enough to finish what he had started. Danny had been used. And now, so had she. The ground beneath the chapel trembled. The mirror began to crack faster, the shards shimmering with something dark behind them. Maria looked at Danny's face. He wasn't speaking, but his eyes moved, locking on hers. He mouthed two words: "Break it." Without thinking, Maria grabbed a piece of broken wood from the shattered pew and swung it at the mirror. The glass exploded, sending shards across the room. The sound that followed was not of breaking glass, it was a scream. Not human, raw, ancient. The glow from the walls faded instantly. The ground stilled. Eli dropped to his knees, gasping as if whatever had been inside him was suddenly forced out. Maria rushed to him, shaking him, but his eyes were glassy, empty. His voice returned, barely a whisper. "I tried to stop it, but it was already inside me." Then he was gone, and for the first time in weeks, the air felt still again. The woods outside were quiet, just the wind in the leaves. Maria stood in the doorway of the chapel, staring out, the broken mirror still humming softly behind her. She had done something, stopped something, or at least delayed it. She didn't know for how long. She walked for hours to get back. The trail behind her seemed longer now. By the time she reached her car, her hands were shaking, her throat dry, but her mind clear. She knew the truth now. Danny hadn't run away, hadn't disappeared. He had been pulled into something much bigger than himself, and somehow he had fought to send a warning. And she had answered it, back in town. Maria returned home to find something resting on her doorstep. A photograph. It was the same image of Danny behind the bar. Only this time, the face in the shadows behind him was gone, and Danny. This time, he was looking directly at the camera, smiling. Maria sat on her front steps long after the sky turned gray with morning. The photo lay in her lap, corners curled from the cold. Danny's smile, now free from the haunting figure behind him, held a peace she hadn't seen in years. It was subtle, but she knew that smile-it was the one he used when he'd finally figured something out. For the first time since all of this began, she let herself believe he might truly be at peace. Maybe not here, not in this world, but somewhere beyond. Whatever had held him for so long in the days that followed, everything changed in small, quiet ways. The tension that had hung over Hollow Pines Motel faded. The motel was permanently closed, its windows boarded, its signs taken down. The new owner who bought the land said he planned to tear it down and build something fresh. When asked about Room 6, he only said, "Some doors don't need to stay open." Maria didn't argue. The woods behind the lantern returned to stillness. No more symbols, no more strange sounds, no figures watching from the trees. People started hiking there again. The clearing where Maria found the underground chamber was overgrown within weeks. Like the forest itself was trying to erase the past, the chapel. She never went back. And when she asked around, no one else had ever heard of it. No history books, no maps, not even rumors. It was like it had only ever existed for her and Danny. She kept Danny's notebook, locked in a drawer. Some of the pages had gone blank after the mirror shattered. The symbols faded like dried ink rinsed in water. The drawings were still there, but the messages, the codes, the warnings, they were gone. All that was left was a final page, added after the climax, in a different handwriting. It simply read, "Thank you." Maria knew it had to be from him. She visited Lila's apartment once more, hoping for answers. The place had been cleared out by the building management, but one thing was left behind in the mailbox: a small USB drive. Inside were Lila's last notes. Her theories had been right. She believed there were points across the country, thin spots between this world and something older. Hollow pines, the lantern, the burned cabin in Colorado, part of a larger pattern. But she had also come to believe that once the pattern was exposed, it lost power. Secrets needed silence to thrive. By documenting everything, by bringing the darkness into the open, Maria and Lila had weakened its grip. Still, not all answers came clean. Eli's body was never found. After the events at the chapel, he disappeared without a trace. No records. No vehicle, no belongings. It was as if whatever had been inside him had erased every part of who he'd been. But Maria liked to think a piece of the real Eli had made it through, just long enough to help her finish what he couldn't. She reopened the lantern, not as a bar, not at first. Just a quiet space where people could come, sit, and remember. Locals returned, slowly at first, then in groups. They shared stories about Danny, his jokes, his favorite music, how he never let anyone drink alone. Maria put his photo on the wall behind the counter. No shadow in this one, just him holding a drink mid-laugh. And when the new sign went up, it simply read, Danny's. People came not just from town, but from nearby counties. A few even came from out-of-state followers of the online forums that had tracked the case for years. They sat at the old tables and asked about the symbols, about the notebook, about the fire at the motel and the woods. Maria never gave them everything. Some truths needed to be earned, but she told enough to make them listen. As more time passed, she finally began to sleep again. No whispers in the walls, no notes on her doorstep. The mirror in her hallway reflected only herself. The shadows no longer moved when she wasn't looking. Whatever had been awakened had been sent back, maybe not destroyed, but contained, quieted, and as the story settled, it found its place in local legend. People still spoke of Danny's disappearance, but now they spoke with closure. He hadn't vanished without reason. It left behind a trail not to be followed blindly, but to be understood. A message to protect others, to stop what had nearly broken through. The town changed too. What once felt heavy and closed off now breathed again. New shops opened. The pub's porch was repainted, even the trees seemed taller. But Maria kept one thing the same: the cross. Danny's chipped gold cross now hung in the window of the bar, where the sun caught it every morning. Visitors would pause there, not always knowing why. Sometimes Maria would watch them from the counter. They stayed long enough, she'd tell them a version of the story. Not the whole truth. Some parts were meant to stay between her and Danny, but just enough to make them wonder. And maybe, just maybe, enough to keep them safe. In the end, the real story wasn't about a haunted room or a dark forest or even a missing bartender. It was about how far one person would go to uncover the truth. It was about facing what you're not supposed to see, not to chase ghosts, but to bring someone home. Danny never walked through the door again, but every time Maria lit the bar's old lantern in the evening, she felt him there, not in fear, not in mystery, in peace. And that was enough.